Thank you all for joining us today for LeggUp's podcast series and today's conversation on resilience and why resilience is a top skill in today's workplace. I am Petra Russell, head at Coaching at LeggUp, and with me today is Dr. Glenn Goss, a globally recognized expert on coaching resilience and humanitarian leader with over 3 decades of experience in building resilience in the outcome or prevention of conflict, crisis, or challenging life situations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Glenn, on this very timely topic. And I am very excited for the opportunity to discuss this with you today here. Very important resource for all of us within that sometimes really needs to be developed and further built out for us to withstand some of those situations that we're facing today. And with that, I'm going to jump in. I am starting out just with something that I've heard a lot about in talking with HR leaders over the past several months. And what's basically coming up a lot is the avoiding of getting into situations that need and require more of resilience building. And the 2 states of mind that come up in conversations are literally fatigue and then depletion. And it appears sometimes that there's a little bit of a confusion as to the difference between the two, right? So I wanted to just throw that on the table here real quick for you to maybe help us sort through and say, what's the difference as far as it pertains to resilience with those 2 states?
Well, it's good to be with you. Yes, of course, we're in this time of coronavirus and the pandemic, and a lot of people who are normally have a lot of energy and have, resilience and ability to cope feel really depleted in terms of their energy. But another part of that is that, and usually this happens cumulatively over a longer period of time, is that, fatigue sets in and, what you were able to do or the load you were able to carry previously, you're just not able to. Even we as therapists and coaches are feeling that as well, because we're in the middle of the pandemic with the people that we're helping.
Exactly. And I guess there's another differentiator when I think about the 2, right? That's the one is really the brain muscle has reached a point where it needs to just really take a break from everything. And that's oftentimes something we can remedy just with some rest, right? And some relaxation. Where depletion is really more that state where we have to literally unplug, get away and rejuvenate ourselves.
Yeah, there's no other way.
A lot of people get into that. Man, I took the weekend and I slept well and I still show back up on a Monday morning and don't really feel that refreshment, right? So that's really where you recognize there's something else going on other than just maybe a little bit of catching up on your sleep. Yeah. So we're trying to really, with resilience, of course, to prevent anything to get this far, right? And we're trying to really look a little bit at self-care, which is something I want to touch with you on in the course of our conversation today. One thing to remember too, and one of the things why I guess really resilience is top of mind, particularly for our HR leaders and people leaders in organizations at the moment, as it pertains really to increased job engagement, work engagement, satisfaction with your role, and organizational commitment, if in place and developed to a certain extent where it's really applicable and usable for people in that current situation that we find ourselves in now for quite some time, right? So when we look at particularly leadership and developing leadership, why is this such an important skill set? It's really part of being able to still, and despite some of the circumstances, to inspire people and keep them motivated and really show there is an upside to any challenge, right? That can turn into opportunity for growth. And it really means that we continue to make meaningful contributions in our respective roles. And so that's one of the reasons and one of the main reasons, right, why that skill set is so important today. I wanted to touch a little bit, of course, on your experience here, which I am most impressed with as far as your exposure to some scenarios that you handled with regard to building resilience in people. And in your professional experience there, with special focus particularly on traumatic stress, spanning over, like I think of over 3 decades now, right, Glenn?
Hard to believe.
Resilience is so important. And how can individuals build resilience and personal resilience at work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually like to start out by defining resilience as being able to bounce back, but also being able to bounce forward as well. And have that agility within the workplace. There is a organizational resilience that is needed for the whole of the company, but there's also that individual and team type of resilience that's needed as well. And my work with, for example, in the Middle East and Africa, where I lived for years and worked, I saw people in the most incredibly difficult, harrowing situations where I was just amazed at their resilience and their ability to bounce back with much fewer resources than we would have in North America. And I think that's, the researchers have been looking at that for a long time. Why is it that some people just have this incredible ability to bounce back and to bounce forward when others just seem to have so many vulnerabilities and inabilities to cope and to process, the horrible thing that they've been through or the difficult or stressful time. And so, getting back to the organization, leaders and managers who are able to spot potential burnout, compassion fatigue, who are able to coach their employees or their team to be able to find that resilience, building the strengths within the team so that they can, literally handle anything moving forward. And that gets really difficult in the pandemic situation because, we have childcare and elder care and difficulty to move and Zoom fatigue and all of these things that are happening at the same time, which really ramps up the complexity and difficulty level where managers really have to think more clearly about how to build that resilience within the team or the whole of the organization.
That is so interesting. So when you look at specifically in contrast, how you just mentioned, right, in the different cultures, what were for you some of the outstanding traits that really made up that extra ability to be resilient in those moments in your mind?
Yeah, definitely are those leaders who have this ability to reflect, on themselves, on their team, maybe being able to not even physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, and hopefully physically too, take a step back and see the bigger picture, see that perspective again, gain emotional regulation in that, and are able to come back with stability and, modeling as a leader, those types of the affect where people can see, hey, we're going to make it through this. It's, I work in the healthcare sector more recently and with disaster relief, health focused organizations. And it's really difficult, to sort of find that balance in those really highly stressful situations where, when you hear about doctors and nurses wanting to give up or or not feeling they can keep going on, you really feel,
yeah,
gee, how do we help that? Another one would be positivity, and there are studies that have been done of a Vietnam prisoner of war camp. They asked them, what really helped you to survive, or who were the people that didn't survive? And they said, well, oh, that's easy. It was the optimists who didn't survive. And they said, what? How is that possible? And they said, well, it was the people in the camps that, Christmas is coming or Easter, and then that came and went, and they didn't get out of the camps and they got more and more depressed. And the gentleman who came out of the camp eventually wrote a book about it. And he called it, this idea of having realistic optimism. So optimism is good, but it needs to have that sort of realistic grounding in the situation. Another one is self-compassion. The third one, I really feel like we can be super critical to ourselves. And when stress levels increase, we become often even more critical. So we need to tune into that compassionate, self-compassionate voice and hear that voice. It has a different sound to it than the critical voice. So I'm, helping managers and leaders to, especially in this time of the pandemic, to really take it easy on themselves, because they really are doing literally heroic jobs in the face of incredible difficulty.
That is so amazing what you just mentioned, specifically with the ability to be realistic in your estimation, right? And keep that in a positive territory without creating things that set yourself up for disappointment, right?
Right.
Really having a realistic gauge and regulating emotions and really acknowledging this is this bad, but it's not this much worse, right? So sometimes
Right.
people really
That
in their own assessment, we got to try to regulate that, sometimes, and really say, is this just some false alarm here? Is it really,
Yeah.
this bad? And just maybe scale back a little bit in our immediate reaction or assessment of something, right? And then keep a little bit more of a straight line path and in approaching it, rather than getting so quickly derailed by some of these emotions that go overboard, right? As in leadership, as we do in coaching too, when we address emotional intelligence and developing cognitive empathy and understanding a little bit what's going on with self, and then of course also what's going on with the person in front of me, right? It's a lot about regulating self, right, in order to then support others in regulating their reactive behavior sometimes, right, that may
Yes.
be a bit off scale. Absolutely. Yeah, I like that a lot. The other thing I love about it is that self-compassion piece that you touched on, and really understanding, how do I really support myself best, right? Because a lot of the habits or these knee-jerk reactions that kick in sometimes, they're not really meant to support us in that situation. And that's part of what you also mentioned already, that inner critic that shows up, right?
Yes.
And tells us what we should be doing and where we're falling short, which in a situation just like currently with the pandemic and people juggling multiple tasks at home and family and work seems to kind of really blend a lot within each other. How do we really stay on top of that in a manner that's supportive and not trying to really beat ourselves up at the end of the day on top of everything, right? Because we feel we fell short on some expectations and ambitions that we had sailed off with in the morning.
Yeah,
See that a lot.
exactly.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. When you think about using the coaching methodology in building resilience in people, right? What do you see in terms of the most effective techniques there to really get to people getting to the habit of continuously building that muscle?
Yeah, we sort of you mentioned the cognitive or the brain, in the way it responds to crisis and trauma and high stress, where something in the brain picks up the signal and there's this fight, flight, freeze response that sends a signal to the adrenal glands, and that adrenaline and cortisone shoots out, and it also shuts down the prefrontal cortex, or the front part of the brain that is involved in creativity and long range planning. So to help people to regulate and to rest, and to also, when you reframe questions as a coach and you say, well, what I think I heard you say was this, how does that sound to you? And their brain is hearing themselves talk and helping them to reprocess the event or events cognitively. And it actually helps to lower blood pressure and get a more emotionally stable response as well. So reframing is certainly a definite idea. Building on strengths, we've already talked about that, and finding those strengths and resiliencies that already are there with the client. Sometimes, again, we want to reflect on the negative, or it just seems like an insurmountable task or obstacle, but there's inherent things. Resiliency is both inherent genetic or God-given sort of ability to bounce back, but there's also resilience that can be taught or can be coached. And I think that's what we're really getting at is, and also shifting the mindset to a more growth, open mindset. Because when our blood vessels narrow and our vision and all of that, so that we can fight, flight, or freeze, we don't have this open mindset. We don't have the open kind of idea. And we also have difficulty finding meaning. So when a coach can also get to a deeper level of, okay, what seems to be going on underneath this, and what is the real meaning as you said earlier, what can the coachee get out of this? There may be a silver lining, or there may be something that is extremely valuable to learn through the crisis or a difficult process.
Yeah, once we try to look through a different lens, right? And that's so hard to do and invite yourself to. And as you said, the part of the brain that kicks in when we're challenged and we're trying to figure out how to, worst case scenario, survive a situation, the prefrontal cortex, the creative part of the brain, is really not invited into the conversation at that point, right? And we
Not at
really
that point.
shortcut, yeah. And then we come up with some solutions that are literally not a good reflection of what we have available within us, right, in order to, and apply to that situation. We're really cutting ourselves short there. And the coaching process is, as you already also mentioned, it's inviting that reflective inquiry, right? It's that really reflecting on experience and realizing there's some things that I have that I can build on here that are strengths within me, right, that have served me already in the past in some similar situations and actually produced pretty decent results. So always build on that first, right? And then, of course,
Right.
the ability, you mentioned there's capability, and of course also the belief, right? So when we sometimes start out specifically around compassion and self-efficacy, is this belief in I can overcome that, right? And a lot of people have to build a little bit more of that belief within themselves and the ability to trust their own resources, right, in order to get through there. And that most definitely helps build that muscle going forward, specifically in a situation that we're in right now where we're really not sure, is there an end in sight, right? We're all hopeful, but we're trying to not be, to your point earlier, not too overly optimistic with it, but trying to figure out, right, is there an end in the, or a light at the end of the tunnel, and how do we build ourselves up until we can maybe more accurately assess that, right? And just not get desperate and as you said, a little bit depressed, in the process of this. Absolutely. I guess what we're really building on in coaching a lot is of course both the gaps where we say we need to develop something, and then the combination of bringing in our strengths. And I guess with building resilience, those two both really equally come into the equation. Just curious from your perspective, again, going through several of those situations with your coachees in the course of your professional career, something that stood out for you where you really thought, wow, this was really a challenging onset, and then it really showed that the individual was able to craft a path, right, and a light forward to get themselves in a better place.
Yeah, well, in the conflict situation with refugees and who have had to flee their country to another one, or internally displaced, it's really been some of the most challenging work that I've done, because people feel like they're just in state of suspended animation. And I think we feel that in the pandemic as well. We, back in March and April, we thought, or I thought, well, a couple months, this will be over and we'll be back to work, travel and everything, seeing our family. And again, just like those Vietnam prisoner of war camp, in that situation, there just seemed to be no end to it. But one of the things that I used to say, even in the protracted conflict and war zone situation, is there's usually a beginning, a middle, and an end to all of these things. And so it's just being able to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there is hope. And even when you perhaps don't quite see that is true, and I know people have lost lives in this pandemic, and jobs, very much difficulty. So I'm not minimizing that, but just saying that there is a process moving forward. Just bringing it back to the organizational level, I guess on the other end, I spoke to an HR manager the other day, and we talked about strategies for the staff. And so I was able to give a webinar on self-care strategies for the people that were working in the healthcare sector. Then I wanted to take it another step further. And I asked him, what do you think we should do? And he said, well, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. Why don't we just get the teams together and talk about what they're grateful for? Talk about the aspect of gratitude. And I had just been on a call with the mental health expert from the Center of Disease Control. And she had mentioned that gratitude actually has an evidence base, and that there's many research studies that say that, people did just express gratitude to employees from managers or in other situations, their mood is elevated. Actually, both the one giving it and the other, and the other. So that's what we did, opened it up, and it was a very positive situation. So I think there's just a lot we can do as managers. And I mean, there's the coaching situation where we have maybe an hour to coach somebody forward, but there's also the coaching environment where we're managing as we go. And
the
we can
coaching
sort of,
habit, exactly. The
yeah,
coaching habit or the coaching culture and organization
coaching culture,
really
perfect.
reverts to that's really our way of how we do things here, right? And beautiful example in terms of really activating the positive emotions, right? Like you said, from the person speaking as well as the person hearing, right? So when we really focus more on positive and creating positive emotions, there's a sensation in the body that really helps us to get stronger rather than focusing, of course, on negative and really getting down that rabbit hole, right? That we sometimes
Right.
experience. Yeah, that's a wonderful experience. And love the fact that you touched on Thanksgiving. That is most definitely a challenging Thanksgiving for most of us here in
Very
the
much.
US,
Yes.
and probably a very big departure from how Thanksgiving used to be, which is another thing that we talk about often with resilience, is that ability to adjust to these changes, right? And how do we
Yes.
cope with change? And all of that is part of building resilience and really seeing the positive in things and reflecting on what is here really that we can all still be grateful for, right? And there's certainly still a lot left despite the circumstances for most of us to spend a few minutes every day, perhaps, right? And just get into the practice of appreciating, or how I sometimes even mention with my coach sheets, why things aren't worse.
Right.
You can really sometimes think through something, go like, but I really managed to keep it in this area here for me, right? And that in itself is already an accomplishment.
Yes.
And shows that there is some strength, right? That I can definitely have the confidence and think it can be built further out on and brings me, further to what, like you said, there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end point, right? In this experience.
And the beginning again.
And the beginning again, because we certainly know there's more challenge ahead, right? And it comes probably at us at a faster and faster pace.
Yeah, that's right.
The more we build that, the better we can respond.
That's
and
exactly right.
I think that was definitely one of those sensations that we all went through, right? It came so quickly and we had to make a lot of adjustments in a very, very short period of time. And sometimes also have to acknowledge that for each other, right? And say it's okay that we're not at the top of our game every day at the moment. And it's okay that sometimes feeling that loss and allow those emotions to come up, just not dwell on it, right? And just really see there is a path forward that's worth looking at. And it's worth, like you said, reframing that a little bit and see opportunity there, which for sure exists. Exactly. I want to just address a little bit our people leaders here today, and maybe everyone that feels really overwhelmed by some of the needs that are coming at everyone, right? In terms of employees' needs for, belonging. You mentioned loss of meaning, right? Looking for purpose. Why is this happening? Why is this also chaotic? And a lot of that anxiety and stress, and sometimes just revert to that straightforward, tried and true support of just having a good conversation, right? And I think that's pretty much what we do in coaching. We do a lot of that active listening and really engage in a very reflective conversation. And I think the more we can bring that to the forefront right now, just as a great way to start, right? And really seeing where people are at and offer that support that we do as coaches too in our space that we hold for each coachee, and really give that opportunity to have a conversation about what matters, right? What's first of mind at the moment. And then also really bringing that around and knowing we're, like you said, we're all in this together in a sense, right? We're really here to support each other. And I think that would be a great step that any leader can take at the moment, is be open to conversations that are just more personal in nature at the moment, and not so much just work related or work priority related, and just acknowledge there's a lot more that makes this a whole person, right? Than just worry about productivity and engagement on the job side. So what we can do here in coaching specifically is affecting right now both, of course, the personal life aspects as much as the workspace. And resilience, of course, is much needed in everything. And like I always say, the way we do one thing is how we do everything. So I try everything translates, into both areas for us. I hope for everyone that joined us today and was able to listen to Glenn's wonderful excursion into building resilience and your very, very insightful examples that you were also able to share with us. I hope this was very relevant and interesting to all of you guys. And resilience and its importance in the workplace cannot be underestimated. So definitely something worth considering in maybe initiating a process in your company to get that installed and implemented and see where resilience can really take you as your workforce is growing forward into what we can definitely say some challenging times ahead.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And of course, we want to see everybody succeed, and we always want to see coaching really impacting everyone in an organization in a way where, like we said, there's a coaching habit that actually forms and there's a coaching culture that we can build, at one person at a time. Glenn, I thank you again. I hope that you can all join us again for one of our upcoming episodes here. We will continue to bring you some expert knowledge. Again, thank you so much, Glenn, for joining us today on this very important topic. And I'm looking forward for all of you to join us again on our next session. Please stay tuned.